now. Okay, and I'm going to turn it over now to Judy.
I think the watchword for 2020 and 2021 is unmute yourself. Thank you so much, Elizabeth, for inviting me here. This is a special one. It's, you know, I'm not in my hometown, but I'm virtually in my hometown, and I'm really delighted to be here. And thank you everyone who showed up. I know that that we're almost zoomed out at this point, but I really appreciate you being here. I thought I'd give you a little bit of the lay of the land about how my presentation is going to work tonight. I have a PowerPoint with pictures, and I have paired those pictures with readings from the book. Asylum is a memoir, and it is published. I have to give a shout out to my publishers, who I think I saw in one of the Zoom boxes. Robert and Dina Mandel are here tonight, and they actually had my book in their background, bless them. And they run their publishing house out of Simsbury, Connecticut. And it's totally coincidental that I ended up with a publisher in my former backyard, but it just seemed like it was shared, and it just totally fit. So I want to say hello to them and thank them for being here. I started the book a lot. I'll just give you a little background about how I started the book and how it sort of morphed over the years. I started the book in 2002 when my dad passed away, and it started as a journal of my saying the Kaddish every single day. I decided that I was going to try and do that for the year and be very traditional about it. And it was, you know, my father had been so ill for so long that it was really a way for me to have a posthumous relationship with him. I really missed so much of him in the 10, 12 years that he was ill. So I kept a journal of saying the Kaddish every day. And as you can imagine, I had 2 young children at the time. The logistics were got a little complicated at times, but I did it. I did it every day for 11 months. I did it in all sorts of synagogues in the Boston area. We belong to a conservative synagogue up here in Newton, Massachusetts, called Temple Emmanuel. And that was my home base, but I said Kaddish wherever it was convenient to say it. If I had to pick up my kids, I went to an Orthodox synagogue that had a minyan very early in the afternoon, like 3:30, 4 o'clock, when the sun set. So I even said Kaddish in Italy when my husband and I were on vacation in Rome, and that was also an experience. So Kaddish is something that is very much a theme that runs throughout the book, because that's how I started the book. But about, I would say, 3 or 4 years into trying to make some sort of sense of my journal entries and making sense of saying the Kaddish, I realized that the story didn't have an arc, and I realized there was something missing. I'm not going to give any spoilers tonight, but I realized I didn't know my father, and that's why I was so keen on having this posthumous relationship with him, as I said, the Kaddish. So I was visiting a friend in Israel in 2008, and I said, you know, I've just pretty much thrown away my whole book, my whole journaling. I didn't throw away the journal, but I pretty much threw away what I was working on, because it was such an internal document, and it would only make sense to my family or people who knew my father. And someone in the chat is asking, what was my father's name? Harold Bolton. And my mother is Matilde Bolton. So my best friend said to me, you have to go back and find people who knew him in the day, which wasn't an easy thing, because my father was much older than my mother. And by 2008, he was almost 90 years old. And I really didn't know how many of his friends and colleagues were alive. But I knew just the man to ask, or just the man to Google, who I thought could help me. And he came up almost straight away when I Googled his name. I emailed him. He was thrilled to hear from me. He remembered me. The families were close when I was growing up, and we visited them often. And I went and it's all in the book. I went and I met him in his apartment in New York. And I had questions to ask him about my father, and he reluctantly answered them. So in that way, after I uncovered the secret about my dad, the book suddenly had legs, and I had a story. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen, and what I've done is I have a variety of family photographs, and I've paired readings to them, as I said. So, and that way you'll get a little taste of what Asylum sounds like, is about. And I don't have to tell this crew that Asylum, of course, is named for Asylum Avenue. I can't tell you how many people when I lived in New York, when I lived in Baltimore, when I lived in Boston, could not believe that I lived on a street called Asylum Avenue. They thought, pun intended, that was the craziest thing they ever heard. But people in Boston knew it a little better because, you pass that Asylum Street exit on I-84 on the way to New York. I can't tell you how many phone calls and texts I got from friends that were like, I just passed Asylum Street, because they knew I was working on the book and they knew I lived on Asylum Avenue. So I'll just say very briefly that Asylum, the title, works on 3 levels. Of course, it's for Asylum Avenue. I grew up at 1735 Asylum Avenue. It's also for, my mother was from Cuba. And although my mother immigrated from Cuba, from Havana in 1958, the rest of her family came over after Castro had taken over the island, and they were literally seeking asylum in the United States. So it works on that level. And the other level is, anecdotally, there were a lot of crazy things that went on in that house. So it almost seemed, it seemed very fitting to use that title because it resonated for me, and hopefully it will resonate for the reader on so many levels. So I'm going to show you the first picture, and that is my father, K. Harold Bolton. He was a lieutenant commander in the United States Navy. He served on a supply ship in the South Pacific during the Second World War. And I'm going to read a little bit about who he was in the Navy and what fascinated me about him. The master's thesis that I had so much trouble finishing while at the Columbia School of Fine Arts in the mid-1980s was a thinly veiled collection of short stories about my father called The 90-Day Wonder. Many of these stories portrayed him as awkward, occasionally cranky, and always secretive. So much so that even when he told me about the war years, he was careful not to make himself a character in his own stories. It's obvious to me now why I had so much trouble filling the gaps in my father's history. The title story dealt with the time K. Harold Bolton entered the Navy as a 90-day wonder, which I thought meant he was extraordinary, but would later find out is a pejorative term for college-educated officer candidates who were fast-tracked for the war effort. In the summer after his 1940 graduation from Yale, when he was 21, my father trained at the Officer Candidate School in the Brooklyn Navy Yard for just 3 months, a highly accelerated program that concluded with men who had socks older than my father having to salute him as an officer, albeit a junior one. So that was my master's thesis. And even though it was fiction, it was a collection of short stories. The first stirrings of Asylum were very much in that collection. And my time at Columbia and writing that thesis also kind of showed me that I really wasn't a fiction writer. And I grew to to love memoir and creative nonfiction. And I started writing a lot of that in my late 30s after I had my children. This is my mother at the age of 19. The photograph is taken in Havana, Cuba. And the story goes that she won a sitting in that photo studio for identifying a Glenn Miller song on the radio. I don't know how true that was. I don't know if they had call-in shows. That's the story that was handed down to me. So I'm going to read just very briefly about my mother. She's a dramatic character. She's emotionally challenged character. And I'm just going to read a little bit about her. I lost my place. Here we go. My mother was scared of growing old, bound up in that lifelong sorrow was the loss of her youthful self, the girl who had nearly been belle of the ball. She inflated the honor of being runner-up in the Queen Esther pageant of 1954 into a victory all its own. Look at those girls, she said anytime she saw a beauty pageant on television. I was prettier than any of them. She had a point. The proof is in a black and white photograph taken of her at 19, almost the same age as Anna. And Anna is a girl who spends a summer with us that summer. The photo shoot had been a prize for identifying the Glenn Miller song Chattanooga Choo Choo on the radio. The photographer turned Matilda's head slightly to the right to look as if she were gazing into the future. Her wavy black hair is loose and cascades down her back. Her lips are dark, her eyebrows arched like a movie star. At 19, my mother was nobody's runner-up. She was magnificent. So that is a little bit about my mother. And my mother, I don't know who's here. I can't see who's here, but my mother taught Spanish for many, 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 many years at Northwest Catholic High School in West Hartford. And like every kid from Kingswood would, get tutored. She tutored like almost every kid from Kingswood when they were frantic about their Spanish finals. So I remember she had a very robust tutoring service going on. These are my parents. They were married in March of 1960, and their trip to the altar was fraught, to say the least. But they made it. They were originally supposed to get married in Havana in December of 1959. And I'm going to leave that story in the book for you to discover for yourselves. But I'll read a little bit about their wedding photo. This is one of the last scenes in the book, and I'm in New York City, and my parents were married in New York City at the Spanish Portuguese synagogue, and I wanted to go back there and just sort of take in the atmosphere. So, and I'm an adult. I'm the mother of college students at that point, but so I went to the Spanish Portuguese synagogue, to the chapel where they got married, just to sort of check things out and drink in the atmosphere. I rode in a cab against a tide of red brake lights with a driver who claimed he couldn't make change. I gave him $20 for the $9 ride. I had to see the chapel where my mother walked down the aisle in what I envisioned was an absurdly elaborate gown for such a small space. By then, abuela is grandma in Spanish, had painstakingly mended the dress that my mother had shredded with a knife 3 months earlier and arrived with it from Cuba the day before the sparsely attended ceremony of March 26, 1960. It occurred to me that my highly superstitious mother improbably married in a gown that connected her to a stillborn wedding. More twisted luck. The groom drove the bride to the wedding. Abuela sat in the front, shivering in the March cold, while my mother spread out her train in the back seat of my father's shark-finned Chrysler. Have you ever heard of such a thing? My mother once asked me. A groom bringing a bride to the wedding? I have not, I replied solemnly. The entrance to the synagogue was locked, but through one of the door panes, I saw a custodian vacuuming. No puede be here, he said, stumbling in the same Spanglish my family spoke. Servicio and 6:30. Por favor, I pleaded. Muy importante. Mis padres se casaron aquí more than 50 years ago. Perhaps the long stretch of time impressed him. He opened the door and motioned for me to put my bag down. I took off my coat and reflexively put my hands up as if I were about to be arrested. Rapido, he whispered. And then, in the spirit of participating with me in a reconnaissance mission, he added, Buena suerte, señora. Good luck. Mazal. I hurried around the corner into the plush, dark chapel and stopped in the middle of the room at the bima, a small raised platform from which the service is conducted. My parents' chuppah, the marriage canopy, consisted of 4 poles to hold up a talit, or a prayer shawl, that would have been adjacent to the bima. The prayer shawl belonged to the synagogue, my mother had said, putting forth one of the countless renditions of her wedding day. The chuppah represents the first home a married couple shares. It also connotes the tent in which Abraham and Sarah welcomed visitors. Passing through their patch of desert with the talit doubling as a symbolic roof, this makeshift home has openings on all sides to represent the couple's vulnerability to life, to life's vicissitudes. As bride and groom, my parents would have faced the chapel's Ner Tamid, the eternal light above the ark. The 10 commandments in this chapel were etched in gold on whitewashed tablets. This was a traditional synagogue where men and women sat separately during services. In the style of a Sephardic Jewish synagogue, women sat on the raised benches along the side rather than behind a makeshift wall at the back. So I kind of contemplate my parents' wedding, and all those details come rushing back to me that my mother told me. And at the end, since I began with Kaddish, and in the very last scene, I say the Kaddish for my father in that chapel, commemorating him, and I sort of kind of came full circle. This is the house at 1735 Asylum Avenue. It's the house that's on the cover of this book. It's the house where I grew up. It's the house where my parents lived for 50 years. And how are we doing on time? We're doing well. Okay, so I'm going to read a little bit about Asylum Avenue. At the intersection of Asylum and Farmington Avenues in Hartford, Connecticut, stands a bronze statue of Alice Cogswell, a little girl who lost her hearing at age 2 after a bout of meningitis rendered her, in the unfortunate parlance of the day, deaf and dumb, unable to hear or speak. The statue shows Alice standing in the palms of 2 enormous hands, perfectly manicured like my father's, that together form the word light in sign language. Alice gave Asylum Avenue its name tangentially by virtue of her educational institution that her father, Mason Fitch Cogswell, helped establish to educate her. The Connecticut Asylum at Hartford for the instruction of deaf and dumb persons, the first of its kind in the United States. It opened its doors in 1817 and stayed in its original location on the Connecticut Turnpike, Asylum Avenue, until 1921. The asylum later changed its name to the American School for the Deaf and moved to West Hartford. By the time my family moved on to Asylum Avenue when I was 3 years old, the building where Alice had received her education was a mammoth insurance company. I grew up 3 miles west of Alice's statue at 1735 Asylum Avenue, on that street whose name had connotations of refuge and madness. In those matters, the address did not disappoint. Alice was a lucky girl. Her next door neighbor was Thomas Hopkins Gallaudet, an educator who went on to co-found and preside over the asylum school. He was the first to recognize that Alice was bright, if lonely. He taught her to spell by using a stick to write in the dirt. Her father cared enough to build Alice a school. Her neighbor cared enough to run it. Her condition ensured that she would never have to hear her parents fight, as mine did, constantly in the boxy 2-story, 3-bedroom, 2.5-bath colonial in suburban central Connecticut that had been my mother's dream. So that's a little bit about Asylum Avenue. And one of the features my mother was most proud of in that house was that we had a built-in vacuum cleaner. It was her pride and joy. And I talk a little bit, I just make some passing reference to it in the book, but it really was a big deal. It really was a big deal for her. This is the Boltons in 1966. I don't know if you could see my cursor. This is my dad. This is 6-year-old me. This is my brother at 1.5 years. This is my mother, Matilde, and this is my sister, Carol. And at that time, my mother had done what so many women in the 1960s did. She went back to school. It was very important to her to be independent, but school was hard for her. And that's one of the other secrets I reveal in the book. And that secret I can share with you. My mother never graduated from college. She told the people, she got her master's degree at Trinity College, which happens to also be my alma mater. She said that she had graduated from the university, but that her transcripts were unavailable because they were in Cuba. And back then in the 1960s, Cuba was really on lockdown and no one could get anything in or out of Cuba. So, that worked to her advantage. And she actually did get her master's degree in Spanish. And then she went on to get a master's degree in education at St. Joseph. I guess it's St. Joseph University now. So I'm going to read a little bit about my mother's time getting a master's degree and how she read Don Quixote to me. My mother enrolled at Trinity College in Hartford in the fall of 1965 when she was 7 months pregnant with my little brother. Her first test of will was getting through a foggy, menacing postpartum year of Don Quixote de la Mancha. Studying the novel became a group effort in our house. Don Quixote was the longest book my mother had ever attempted to read. She read much of it to me in the small, square, thickly painted yellow kitchen, with her own commentary slipped in. Pobrecito Don Quixote, he was such a dreamer and he suffered so much for it, she said, relating to Cervantes's fictional character. I loved watching my mother try to make dinner. She barely knew how to cook and resented having to come up with something for the table every night. So she conjured for me another installment of Don Quixote's adventures with the hapless Sancho Panza and the prostitute Dulcinea. To the fantasist Don Quixote, Dulcinea was the finest of women. She was dulce, sweet. In my mother's account, Dulcinea was hapless and fea. As Mom stirred canned vegetables and ketchup into a pot of stewing meat, the mixture splattering on the book's pages, she said that Don Quixote's precious library burned. He was too influenced by his book, she said, as if that also explained our charred dinners, the exoskeletons of which we scraped off Pyrex pans. All of my mother's school books had an air of mystery. They came to our house wrapped in brown paper, displaying exotic stamps from Spain. The books she ordered from the land of Don Quixote were scattered all over the house, many with pages stuck together that had to be parted with a letter opener. I loved the feel of the book's rough paper, their ragged edges. The most impressive of them was the Dictionary of the Royal Spanish Academy, a doorstopper of a book that came directly from Madrid. Every word of the Spanish language was defined between its marbled brown covers, words waiting to be arranged into the labored term papers, many drafts of which my mother wrote and which ended up as crumpled balls of typing paper on the floor of the dining room. So, but my mother graduated in 1969, and my sister and I were at her graduation. So she did it. This is a picture of my dad at a local radio station. I don't know if some of you might remember the country western station in Hartford, WEXT. On Sundays, they gave studio space for local community programming. And my father had a show called The Music of Spain, which he hosted in Spanish. His Spanish was good. His accent was not. I remember thinking, Don's Spanish sounds a lot different than Mom's, but he was very into Spanish music, into Spanish culture. And and it was really a thrill for me to hear his voice pouring out of the radio. We all listened, and occasionally my mother corrected his grammar. And I'm going to read a little bit to you about the radio station. In a black and white picture of my father playing weekend DJ, scattered white lines break up the photograph's gloss. K. Harold Bolton wears a no-nonsense white shirt, black pants, and a 5 o'clock shadow, even though the clock in the picture is just coming up on 12:15 p.m. In his left hand is a stopwatch. Behind him are consoles with large buttons and instruments to gauge sound levels, instruments that look as if they belonged in a war room rather than a radio station. In front are two turntables unfurling pasadoble music. I know this from the record cover propped up nearby, announcing in a ribbony script, Suspiros de España, Spanish marching music that has an accompanying pasadoble, a two-step dance that acts out the drama of the bullfight. Traditionally, the man is the matador and the woman his cape, which he whips around. The woman can also take on the role of the bull or an adoring señorita dancing flamenco by herself, much the way my mother did her own private two-step. My father is offering a toothy grin that announces a happiness born of music and memory. Caballeros y damas, he says into a large microphone suspended from the ceiling, gentlemen and ladies. His voice pours out of the radio and fills the house, his heavy American Spanish so distinct from my mother's high, light pitched version. We gather around the radio with my mother and thrill to the sound of his voice. In that moment, my father is a celebrity. Despite his accent, he has known all things Spanish for a very long time. This is a picture of my mother and us three kids. That's me, that's my sister Carol, that's my brother John. I'm 9 years old, and we are in Miami for the summer. This was taken at a cousin's wedding, my mother's cousin's wedding. That summer, my parents had separated, and we were in Miami with my mother, and it was a difficult time. We three kids really missed my dad. And we had to acclimate to another culture, my mother's Cuban family. And that is really where we honed our Spanish because they didn't speak much English. And we were both, they were sort of an oddity to them because we, came from Connecticut and, we saw snow and they had never seen snow. So they were always, we were always a little bit of a curiosity to them. But we spent a lot of time with my mother's family, and Miami was really the first time that I understood my Latinx heritage and that I felt Latinx. So I'm going to read a little bit to you, a scene that takes place in my cousin Estercita's apartment. Every night, the Cuban expats were very keen on trying to catch Castro on air. They were hoping for these errant airwaves to come and where he would speechify in La Plaza de la Revolución. And they didn't really listen to him. They pretty much screamed at him the whole time he was on screen. But that was their thing. They wanted to see him. They needed to vent or whatever it was. And this is a scene where we are sitting in the living room and I save the day. Later that night, the living room was crowded with expat Cubanos trying to listen to Fidel Castro. Pepe, Estercita's husband, adjusted the rabbit ears until the electronic snow gave way to a fuzzy picture of Castro, el líder, el máximo, with his woolly, ragged beard, a beard that was an affront to the smooth-shaven men in Langley, Virginia, and in Washington, D.C., and the Cubanos in Miami. Watching El Líder Máximo in Havana in his drab military uniform with a lidded cap made me feel farther away from my father. Castro spoke in one long, highly animated streak of breath, like the other Cubans I knew in Miami. Pepe and his poker buddies screamed, "Hijo de mala madre," at the screen. The ladies at Estercita's manicure table joined the men in cursing Castro's jerky, scrolling television image. These were Cubans stranded just 90 miles from Havana, desperate to tune in Castro every time the wind brought his gray profile into their living rooms. On that night, the CIA had not spiked Castro's coffee with LSD or poisoned his rum. His cigar did not explode. The CIA agents did not get close enough to dust El Líder's shoes with thallium salts to make his hair and beard fall out when he might lose his strength, as Samson did after Delilah Delilah cut off his hair. None of these rumored fears came to pass for the evening. For the time being, El Líder Máximo would not lose his machismo. And to prove his sobriety, he jabbed an index finger in the air and spoke in a pellucid Spanish that came to us all the way from La Plaza de la Revolución. Yet his voice sounded hoarse from broadcasting interference. Estercita's neighbors continuously drifted in and out of the apartment, trailing behind them whispers of Cuba, Cuba, mi Cuba adorada. But Castro was indifferent to Cuban suffering in the diaspora. La Plaza de la Revolución could have been on the silvery moon just as well as in tarnished Havana. In the end, Castro's resilience was as maddening to my relatives as it was to the CIA. No one can get rid of this bastard, I had heard my father say at one of my parents' parties. I took in the crowded scene of anxious Cubans through the rose-tinted sunglasses I had swiped in a fit of pique at the Rexall. I gripped my small red pocketbook. I got up for more ice cream. Just when I passed the television, the room burst into exclamation. Para! One of the poker players screamed for me to stop. No te muevas. I had stumbled upon the sweet spot in the room when the reception was perfect as long as I kept standing there. The room was abuzz. Mira eso, la americanita arregló la televisión. I had fixed the television. Por Dios, Castro talks forever. La niña can't stand there all night, my mother said. She can for 10 cents an hour, Pepe bellowed. Night after night, I became a human antenna collecting dimes and saving them in my little red purse. If I loaded enough change into a payphone, perhaps I could finally connect with my father over 1,000 miles away in Connecticut. I wanted to go home, to go back north where it was cooler, north where my parents were still in love. So that is the picture of us. And this picture I like to show to Connecticut people because this is a picture of my paternal grandfather. I should say that my parents, there was a very wide age difference. And my father was very, very assimilated. He grew up in New Haven, Connecticut. He was an Ashkenazi Jew. His parents came as infants from Russia. And my mother was Sephardic. And she was actually a first generation Cuban because my grandparents had come to Cuba from Greece and Turkey and went to Cuba because not only did they have relatives there already, but felt that they could adapt better to the country because they knew Ladino, which is a 15th century version of Spanish. And they felt that they could learn Spanish quickly, which they did. They spoke Spanish perfectly without an accent. So this is my grandfather. He had an orchestra in New Haven called the Bolton Cipriano Orchestra. He played up and down the East Coast at debutante balls and fraternity parties. And he also was a Yale graduate. He was in the class of 1913 at Yale, which was very unusual for a Jew to go to Yale at that time. He worked his way through Yale as a musician. He had a union card and he played at a lot of parties. He was actually Cole Porter's classmate, although I'm sure the two never really mingled. This is a picture of my mother's house in Cuba. I went to Cuba for the first time in 2012, and I expected it to be emotional, but it really overwhelmed me. Cuba, all my life, had been a place that was on lockdown. There was absolutely no way to go there. My mother pined for it every single day. She tried mightily to transplant sunny Havana to cold West Hartford. I can remember her standing at the kitchen window and sighing and saying, Cuba, Cuba, como te extraño, Cuba, Cuba, how much I miss you. And she really did miss Cuba. And in those days, we had there was just this wall. It was more than an iron curtain. It was like a steel wall that, and Cuba could not be penetrated. The embargo was very, very strong. And Cuba loomed very large in my imagination throughout my childhood. And that was in part because of, because of my mother's longing for it so much. We played Cuban music, we ate Cuban food. At Passover, my grandfather said, instead of next year in Jerusalem, next year in Havana. I mean, it was a very, very deep longing. And I really understood through my mother and her family what it was like to be dispossessed and what it was like to be in exile, because they truly felt exiled every single day. So in 2012, I had the opportunity to go to Cuba with my with the Jewish community here in Boston, and I went to visit the cemetery and saw graves of family there. There is no family left there of my mother. The last cousins were rescued in the Mariel boat lift in 1980. So there hasn't been anybody in Cuba for a very, very long time. But there were it's interesting because the Sephardic and Ashkenazi communities in Cuba were very, very separated. There was very little mingling between them. In fact, my aunt married somebody from the Ashkenazi community, and it was almost like a mixed marriage or something. There wasn't, there was Ladino, there was Yiddish, they had their own schools. The Sephardim had their own schools. In fact, my mother went to a school called Theodore Herzl. So it was just very, very separate and very, very different worlds. But I went to Cuba, and I was really determined to see my mother's house, because I had heard about La Calle Merced, number 20 Merced Street in Old Havana all my life. And there were all sorts of images that I had conjured in my head over the years about it. And I finally made it there. So I'm going to read a little bit about what it was like to go to La Calle Merced, finally, after all those years. After all those years of pining for it, after all those years of imagining it, after all those years of almost not believing that it was really there. Finally, it was time to see Calle Merced 20, where my mother grew up, the storied address of my childhood. For me, all things Cuban began and ended there. It was the place where my mother would always be young, where my grandparents shut the door on 25 years of possessions and walked away forever. It was the place where my mother said she shined the marble stairs better than the maid. It was my mother's world. Greenish light painted the facade where I knocked on the heavy door. A pregnant woman answered and invited me inside a small, dark place that almost certainly had not changed since my mother lived there. Maroon brocade furniture crowded the four-room apartment, a big screen television, the focal point of the living room, broadcast in garish colors and ran without sound. Like my parents' bedroom on Asylum Avenue, the place felt existentially noisy, with so much stuff crammed into such a small space. The current occupants' furnishings were obviously gifts that their relatives in America brought them, since Cuba was once again open for visiting. Their relatives must have taken one of the daily charters to Cuba that left from a corner of Miami's international airport. Check-in there was a veritable marketplace of American materialism, with Cuban expats emptying Costco and Target and Best Buy goods for their relatives still trapped in Cuba. Carts almost toppled over with boxes of microwaves and televisions. The expats were also determined to get larger items like bicycles, scooters, and air conditioners to their relatives. There was so much concentrated determination in that terminal. And then I see that we're running out of time, and I want to leave time for Q&A. I'm just going to skip down to where I leave the house and my reaction to being in the house. I thanked my host profusely and tried to offer her money for the impromptu visit. As soon as I held out the cash, I felt like a fat cat gringa buying memories that weren't quite mine. The only relatives I had left in Cuba were now in graves at the Jewish cemetery in Guanabacao. She refused the money and sent me on my way with good wishes and blessings. I couldn't leave yet. I sat on the stoop, my head heavy against the heavy my head against the heavy wooden door. The same door my grandfather had quietly pushed open after playing dominoes late into the night. The same door my mother gently tapped on in code to let Abuela know she was home. I finally understood how deeply, how intricately my mother had invented her comfortable Cubana life until she had believed it herself. There it was again, the story of a life pegado con chicle, held together with chewing gum. While sitting on that stoop, I cried. My tears came as suddenly as a cloudburst, the kind of crying that darkens the mind like a stormy sky. I squeezed my eyes shut and saw a dashboard of pulsing light. I cried with the recognition that the despairing dances I did with my mother at 1735 Asylum originated here. As a child, I thought my mother missed her grand home in Havana, but the apartment at Calle Merced 20 struck me as one of the saddest places in the Cuban capital. So I'm going to just show you two more pictures, and then hopefully we'll be able to have a little conversation. This is the courtyard of my mother's house in Cuba. Every Cuban apartment building has that kind of courtyard. The story goes, I'm not sure if I believe it, that the kosher butcher would come around to houses, Jewish houses on Fridays, and slaughter chickens in the courtyard so that they would have fresh chicken for Shabbat. I don't know. That's the story. And I just pass it on as a curiosity. And this is just a street scene in Cuba, and that's the capital in Havana in the distance. It's really, I mean, it's in the country is in disrepair, but it's still beautiful nevertheless. There's something very magical about it, and I really want to go back again. So I thank you for listening. Elizabeth, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great. If you want to stop sharing your screen, then we can see.
I am going to do that as soon as I figure out how to do that.
Just
okay.
Yeah.
Did I do that? No, I did not. Okay, hold on. Stop share. I see it.
Stop share. Yeah. There you go. Great. Well, people have any questions or comments, please put them into the chat. We have a couple of reminiscences about the radio station and about I think maybe one of your neighbors nearby already in there. I'm wondering, I can pose a question while we're waiting to see what else people would like to talk about. If you could say a couple words about your Jewish experiences in West Hartford. It sounds like you had the Sephardic family, their own Jewish traditions, your father's family being more assimilated from Ashkenazic, and I know that you had some different experiences growing up. Can you share anything about that?
Well, I had a very checkered Jewish education in West Hartford. We certainly grew up more with Sephardic traditions than my father's traditions, because my mother's family were the ones who observed the holidays. My father's family barely observed anything. So there was at the high holidays, there was a Sephardic congregation that got together, and we went there for the high holidays. And when I was in 6th grade, my mother decided that the Hebrew education I was getting in Sunday schools was not enough. So she sent me to what was then called the yeshiva, later called the Hebrew Academy of Greater Hartford. And I know it's called something different now. And I went there through 9th grade. And then I went to Mount St. Joseph Academy for high school, and I loved it. But it was quite a change from the Hebrew Academy. And all I can say is, if you want to know the story, read the book.
Absolutely, and I recommend it. The Rolnicks wanted you to speak a little bit about your unusual schooling, so I think that's probably what she's referring to. So yeah, we'll have to get the book to learn more about that.
My brother and sister went to Kingswood, but I went to Mount St. Joseph Academy.
And before that, for elementary school, you went where to Morley?
I went to the Robinson School for a couple of years, and then I went to the Morley School.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Wow, that's really ancient history. I haven't thought about the Morley School in a long time.
Yes. It says, I found a picture of your mom reading Don Quixote.
Really? I'd love to see that picture.
Recognize her from our Sephardic congregation in West Hartford.
Yep.
Where did the Sephardic congregation meet?
Temple Emmanuel, I think.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Someone is asking if I have any ties still to our community. No, my mom is, unfortunately, she's not doing well, and I moved her up here 5 years ago to be near me. She is at Hebrew Senior Living here.
Thank you.
I see that my at Adam Cohen, who was Jerry Cohen's son. Jerry and my father went to Yale together. Jerry Cohen, I think, was a year behind my dad. He was Yale 41, and he was our dentist. And I have to say, he, I don't know if you're still on, Adam, but your dad got the biggest kick out of my mother because she was so ditzy. He used to call her Lucy. But yeah, he was wonderful. He was very, 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 very nice.
Nice. A question about Jewish life in Cuba when you visited there. Anything you
Well,
would share?
yeah, the Jews were middle class, upper middle class up until the revolution, and most of them came here. Most of them, fled Cuba after Castro took over. There is a nominal Jewish community. A lot of them are Jews by choice. There is a wonderful woman who actually went to school with my mother named Adela Dworkin, who is the head of the Jewish community. And one of the things that they asked us to do when we went there, Adela runs a pharmacy in one of the, I think in a room in El Patronato. And El Patronato was the Jewish center, big synagogue. And Adele, when we went, they asked us to bring like lots of over-the-counter medications, like aspirin, Advil, cold medication, all that kind of stuff. And we did. But I have to say, walking, when I walked into the hotel for breakfast, I had my bag because we were going to the pharmacy that morning. I had my bag full of stuff. The hostess begged me to give her some Advil because she said her daughter had bad migraines. And people are deprived there, but they're absolutely lovely, 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 lovely. So Jewish life, there is a weekly Shabbat service. I think for the high holidays, they have a rabbi come from Latin America. I think when I was there, I think there was a rabbi coming from Argentina. But it's, it's not formal. It's not as structured as it was, of course, when Jews lived there in the 40s and the 50s, in my mother's era. It's certainly not as structured, and the synagogues barely, have a minyan.
Thank you. We have a couple very specific questions. So
Okay.
Beverly says, I was your family's pharmacist, and for 50 years, I wondered why your father signed his checks with 3 different colored pens.
Yes, that's in the book, Beverly. I love you. I can't believe you remembered that. Yes, my father was very, very quirky. He did that with his envelopes too. The return address was in one color, the addressee was in another color, and then for good measure, he'd turn over the envelope and he'd write his return address again. Yes, he did it in 3 colors. It was like his own personal flag. Beverly, I love you for remembering that, because that's one of the most vivid things I remember about my dad.
It wasn't me. It was my husband, Ronald, who was his pharmacist. Right. The computer's in my name.
Bishop's Pharmacy.
Yes. Oh my God, what a memory. What a memory that brings, I'm just like right back there. I can see his signature and his inimitable print. He had gorgeous print.
I used to talk to your dad at length because we were both from New Haven.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah. So I talked to him at length many times, and he was very patient with me.
Well, he
I
loved
liked him.
talking about New
I liked
Haven.
him a lot. And I spoke to your mother mostly on the phone. She didn't usually come into the store,
Right.
but she was very interested in getting Unduraga or Conchitoro wine from Chile.
My mother?
Your mother.
My mother didn't drink. Ooh, maybe you're
That-
revealing a
that-
side of her that I didn't know about.
I remember we had a tough time getting because it was a Chilean wine, and in those days, it wasn't widely available. But she wanted Unduraga or Conchitoro. We couldn't get Unduraga. We got Conchitoro. Maybe she used it sacramentally.
Yeah, right. I think maybe she probably wanted it for parties. They used to throw
Oh.
a lot of parties,
Oh,
and a lot of
that could be.
Latinos came to the parties.
That could be.
Yeah.
One other person wanted to know if you had a family member who had a shoe store in Hartford. They volunteered at Hebrew Senior Care until recently.
Yeah, my mother's brother had a shoe store in Hartford.
Oh, okay. Great. Carrie Shea is remembering that your mother was her Spanish teacher at Northwest Catholic. And after your grandfather died, she wore a black turtleneck and a black skirt every day with a large Star of David necklace. I had tremendous respect for her.
I'm glad you did, Carrie, because that was a very strange thing to do. And she was actually called on it by the principal of the school, saying, you know, you're really bringing down the kids in your classroom wearing black every day and conjugating verbs about, you know, to die and so on and so forth. My mother was very quirky. And my mother said, why? The nuns here wear black every day. Why can't I wear black every day? And that totally shut her down. And my mother proceeded to wear black for a year.
Wow. Thank you. I think Harriet Samuels has her hand up. Harriet, do you want to unmute yourself?
Yes, I have to say that I remember your parents well and your siblings and you. I spent many days visiting at your home and taking some Spanish lessons from your mom. I wasn't very successful as a Spanish student, but she tried very hard and she helped as much as she could. We often got together, and those of us who are from the area, I see there were several people on the chat, on the Zoom. Please remember us to your mom.
I will. She, unfortunately, she has dementia. But sometimes there's a little recognition, and I will certainly mention, I remember you, Harriet. I remember your parents as well. And I remember you lived on Middlebrook Road, I think, right?
Right on the corner of Middlebrook and Ballard.
That's right. That's right.
And
I
your
do
mom
remember
walked
that.
down and visited with us many times.
Yes, I do remember that. And I remember your parents. So thank you for being here.
Well, I saw this and I said, I know this lady.
Wonderful. Marilyn Rothberg wanted to know if you're working on another book now.
Yes. It's, you know, it's very in its very beginning stages. And that book is going to belong to my mother.
Oh, wow. Great.
At least that's the plan for now.
Wonderful. There is somebody just named iPad who also has a hand up. Would you like to unmute? Oh, maybe a question about your brother's name.
My brother? What is my brother's name? Who is
Hi,
iPad?
I'm
Hi.
iPad. I'm Madeline Levy. I had messaged you when I first saw about this conversation because when my grandfather came from Turkey,
Yep.
he and some other gentlemen in the Hartford area started Sephardic congregation in the 1920s. And so I know your family from that. And so I was curious because in looking online for pictures and things, which is where I saw the picture of your mother, I think with you. And I remember I can recognize her from that picture.
Mhm.
but there was a gentleman who had the shoe store. What was his name?
That was my uncle, Isaac
Uncle.
Albrecht. Isaac
Oh, so
Albrecht.
he might be the one that I have a picture in my mind of someone, and I didn't see it in any of the things you've shown, but it just brings back wonderful memories for me. I was born in Hartford. I live in Bloomfield. I've been here my whole life.
Mhm.
And all the Sephardic and their family members and everybody, my mother was Ashkenaz, my father was Sephardic. And
Mhm.
it just feels like one big family for me. So I've not met
Yeah.
you, but seeing you here just really, it does something for me. So thank you for that. I look forward to reading your book, and you just bring back wonderful memories for me. So
Thank you
I
so
appreciate it.
much.
And I
Thank
have
you.
loads of documents because my grandfather, along with other gentlemen, was a treasurer of the congregation, and then my father was, and I was, and
Mhm.
we closed up the congregation. I want to say it was a couple of years after my dad passed away, so that was around probably 2002, maybe.
Mhm.
Um,
I was correct in remembering that they met at Temple Emmanuel for the high holidays, right?
we did for a long time. We rented we rented the chapel at the Emmanuel Synagogue, but prior to that, it was some shoals in Hartford. Where they went, and then the Emmanuel needed that space, and we went to a good Asylum, and then that only lasted about a year, and we ran out of congregants, we ran out of someone, we didn't have someone to do our services, so we disbanded. But it's just wonderful memories for me, and I have loads of documents to get to the Historical Society.
Oh, that
So
sounds great.
We're
yes,
looking forward to
pictures,
that,
and
Madeline.
yes, yes. So thank you very much. I really appreciate this evening.
Thank you for being here.
We also have a little
Sure.
memory from Ruth Tulin Sion. I'm not sure how to say last name. I drove your mom to Temple Sinai on Sundays as we discussed conversos, Herzl, and Jewish students studying at St. Joseph.
That sounds about right.
Yeah.
My mother didn't drive. My mother never learned to drive. So she, she made a lot of friends who drove her places.
Wonderful. One of the things I really, one of the little pieces I loved about the book was how your mother befriended all these Portuguese women on the bus line, because the bus line was so important to her as a way of getting around. And and she loved the fact that she could figure out the language because it was similar enough.
To Ladino.
Ladino, right?
She taught herself Portuguese. She was quite fluent. And I will say about the Asylum Avenue bus, if it wasn't on the bus line, we didn't go. We just didn't go. My violin lessons were on the bus line. My allergy shots were on the bus line. The dentist was on the bus line. Everything was arranged on the bus line.
Right. Yeah, that was wonderful. I like that a lot. Great. Well, thank you so much, Judy, for being with us. I did put 2 links in the chat of where people can get a hold of the book if you prefer to purchase from RJ Julia. I'll just put that, I'll put it in one more time. There's a link there. And then there's also a link to find the book on bookshop.com, which is another great place to buy books.
Which is a great place because they support independent bookstores. So
exactly, yeah. Judy also has a blog that has a bunch of information about the book and about her
I can
writing.
put my website in the chat. I'll put my website in the chat.
Great.
There are reviews, there's other stuff I write. I write a lot of personal essays, and a lot of those published essays are on the website. So it's just my name, all without space, judyboltonfastman.com.
Gotcha. I see a message that there's another question, but I'm not sure if I'm seeing the question. So if somebody would like to unmute and ask the question, please go ahead.
Hi, just curious. My friend Steve Cohn lived on Ballard Drive on the corner of Trout, and we're in touch a lot. He married a woman from Panama.
Yes, she was. I remember her. She was beautiful. I loved.
She was, they were such wonderful friends. And in fact, she was the real estate agent that sold us this house. We see Steve. He's in Boynton Beach, right? Boynton Beach or Boca right now. we're in touch. We see him at least a few times a year. And I thought you
Oh,
lived right
wow.
across the street. And also the Levy woman, was her father Henry Levy?
No, I know who you're thinking of. Madeline, your father was not Henry Levy, right? Oh, I guess she left. No, she and I
Nope.
corresponded. Are you there, Madeline? Well, she and I corresponded a little bit. Her father, I think, was named Samuel Levy, but Henry Levy was also was Sephardic and ran the Sephardic congregation
Yes,
for many
we,
years.
we lived in a house, we lived on Lenox Street, downstairs from
Ah.
the Sauls. Rachel
Oh, my
Saul's parents.
goodness.
And
That's
of course,
wonderful.
they and the Levies were very close. And I
Mhm.
think Henry Levy may have been a client of mine at one time, but we had a lot of connections. But Steve Cohn and I are really very close.
Henry
Steve
Levy,
Cohen-
Who's
Oops, I'm
speaking?
sorry. That's Madeline. I'm sorry.
Oh.
My father was Max Levy, and Henry Levy
Oh,
and
Max
his wife and daughter came from Greece, and my grandfather sponsored, we're not related. My grandfather sponsored them when they came to this country. And so,
Salalaika?
I'm sorry?
Was it Salalaika?
Salonika? I don't know.
Salonika.
They were,
Yeah.
I think they were from Salonika, and their daughter Esther lives in New York.
Mhm.
Their son Joe lives in California, and their daughter Ann lives still in Connecticut. But the Saul family, Victor Saul, was friends with my grandfather. And along with Victor Saul and some other gentlemen, my grandfather are the ones who started the Sephardic congregation. And I think that
Well-
was around 1927.
We moved to Lenox Street. We were on the first floor of their
Wow.
house. We were there. I came back from basic training and Max was on his deathbed. He was dying at the VA hospital. And I went, and my mother said, "You've got to go over and see Max." Well, he was just so grateful for me coming. And of course, the parents were heartbroken because Max was such a wonderful guy. And then Mr. Saul died. And Mrs. Saul was invited to their other sons in Vermont, where he was a professor. And she came up there to be, to have a good time. And he passed away. He dropped dead of a heart attack. So it's just,
Oh, my goodness.
she eventually went to live with Rachel, but we were with them through some
Oh, my
exciting
goodness.
times when Rachel got married. And when they had the losses they did.
Are you talking
Yes.
about Rachel Saul, the singer?
Yes. I played
Rachel's-
with, yes, I played with her. I was an Al Jarvis piano player.
Oh, my goodness. That's awesome.
Who's speaking?
So I played for a lot of
Madeline.
weddings. I played for a lot of
Pardon me?
weddings. I played for a
Yes.
lot of weddings.
Who was
So you know
speaking,
Tommy
please?
Lannis,
What?
Madeline Levy.
That
So
was
you know
Henry-
Tommy Lannis?
I played with
Who
Tommy
was the
Lannis
gentleman
many,
from Lenox
many
Street?
times. And we saw Mel maybe up until a few years ago at the Greek Festival. But I did a lot of Greek music with Tom, and I adored him because he played, violin, clarinet, and he was just,
Yes.
he would hire the best musicians he could get. So every job I played, which a lot of them were at the Greek church, were just exciting because they were just wonderful musicians.
And he was my music teacher in junior high school.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Which was where?
King Philip School in West Hartford.
Uh-huh.
I'm having flashbacks.
Elementary school.
here.
Okay.
Yes.
This is like a
It's
big
wonderful.
reunion.
It is.
Bringing
And Rachel
all these names back. By the way,
yes, and Rachel,
did Jerry Tarr live 2 or 3 houses from you on Asylum?
Me?
Yeah.
On Asylum? That name doesn't sound familiar, but I will tell you that I think somebody in the chat, I missed it, said that they knew the previous owner of 1735, the Laters, and the Laters'
I
daughter
did too.
Nancy saw a review of my book in Hadassah magazine and reached out to me. She said she almost fell off her chair when she saw it was 1735 Asylum Avenue, because that's where she grew up until she was a teenager.
Well, I read your book. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Brought
Thank
back a
you.
lot of memories of me growing up. I grew up in Hartford, not West Hartford,
Uh-huh.
but I knew so many from Plant Junior High.
That's
and
my
King
junior
Philip.
high.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah,
Well,
by the way, if people are in Boynton Beach area, you can get my phone number from the Historical Society. It's Harriet.
Great, thank you, Harriet. Well, this has been great, and I really appreciate learning more about the Sephardic community in the area as well, which I think we're looking forward to, to being able to document and
Yes,
understand more. So thank you so much.
thank you.
So thank you all so much for being here tonight. And thank you so much to Judy for sharing her stories with us. And the book is a great read. So I really do urge you to get a copy through whatever your favorite book vendor is. We'll look forward to seeing you at our next program. We actually have another program on growing up in West Hartford, which is going to be about growing up in West Hartford in the 40s and 50s with 4 panelists, and that's going to be on March 8th. So you can, I know some of you have signed up for that already, but you can join us for that one, sign up on our website. And thank you so much for your time, Judy, and sharing
Oh,
your.
thank you. It was a
Memoir
pleasure. It
with
was
us.
really a lot of fun. Thank you, everybody. I so appreciate you coming.
Thank
Thank
you.
Bring
you.
back all these memories and the three-tone checks. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Good night.
Good
Good
night.
night.
Night, everyone. Thank you.
Good night.